I mean, none of this is what the FBI does. And none of it is what people expect their $11 billion worth of taxpayer money to go in and fund. Right. Like, nobody thinks that's what the FBI does. Right. They think they go after bank robberies and catch spies and stop terrorists. So, it's nonsense.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not parents at school board meetings. Right.
One would think that would be a problem.
Mainstream media gives you the impression that there is nothing good about America. In direct contrast to that, my podcasts will prove by examples that America has always been and still is the land of opportunity for everyone.
Welcome to another episode in the series Life's Lessons with Dr. Bob. My guest today is Kyle Seraphin, a very interesting guy that I first met in late 2022 when James O'Keefe, the founder and former head of Project Veritas, brought him to my studio. Kyle had been a special agent at the FBI for 6 years, but was recently suspended, and James was considering him for a senior position to manage all of Project Veritas's undercover investigations. But as you'll learn a bit later, that didn't quite work out. Kyle was exceptionally qualified for that job. During his time at the FBI, he was trained in cold case homicide investigations, vehicle combat survival, surveillance, and counterintelligence. He spent 3 years in the Special Operations Group, where he led armed surveillance teams targeting high-priority criminals and terrorists. Prior to his government service in the FBI, Kyle spent 3 years in the U.S. Air Force, where he was trained as a para-rescue specialist whose job is rescuing downed pilots at sea. This included training in combat parachuting, high-angle combat diving, water survival, and underwater egress. All in all, Kyle was a seasoned and well-trained operator, but all of that training and experience went out the window when he was suspended without pay from the FBI in June of 2022 for being a whistleblower. Since that time, Kyle has been an outspoken critic of the FBI and other government agencies and has appeared numerous times with leading podcasters and also on national news. There's a lot to talk about, so let's dive right in. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dr. Bob. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with Project Veritas.
Sure.
Soon after you were suspended from the FBI, James introduced you to me. He wanted me to fund a senior position for you at Project Veritas. So first, how did you and James link up?
I had access to some information that the FBI had I'm trying to think of exactly how it came to my box. I guess I got it from a guy named Garrett O'Boyle, who people will recently remember was just reinstated to the FBI, and he testified in front of the House Weaponization Committee. He famously said that the FBI will crush you if you go up against them. And Garrett and I were sort of in cahoots as whistleblowers, if you will, just as fate would have it. We happened to link up over a common stance about Christianity and our ability to resist government tyranny and say that we didn't want to get a shot for COVID. And it kind of grew into something more because we had both seen problems within the Bureau and engaged in whistleblower activity prior to ever meeting up. And so the two of us were sort of in this similar fight together. He was independently bringing information that he thought was a violation of rule, policy, or law, which is the standard for a whistleblower, to members of Congress and up his chain of command and so on and so forth. And I was in the same business. And by the time that I was proposed for indefinite or forever suspension, which was in April of 2022, Garrett and I had been discussing the case of Project Veritas and specifically what they had going on over the Ashley Biden diary and the Southern District of New York's court case against Project Veritas specifically. And I guess he had gone looking at their case and had simply seen that it was a restricted file. And so the FBI does a couple of different things to protect higher value or maybe let's higher priority cases. If you are a member of academia, if you are someone who has a high public profile, if you are a politician, if you're a member of the clergy, there's a few other protections that fall in there. If you're a member of the news media, you get this sort of a delineation where the FBI categorizes the case as a sensitive investigative matter, and they usually lock down or restrict these files. So every FBI agent theoretically could see most cases that are out there, even the ones that are, highly classified. It's not really a classification question. They just have to have, one, a need to know, and then two, they would have to be able to actually access it. And in the system that we had called Sentinel, the restriction was when you actually manually shut that down through the sensitive investigative matter. They did that for Project Veritas. And so what we noticed is that it was shut down specifically as a subcategory of news media. And what we also found out is that the Southern District of New York was arguing in their motions in open court that there was no one who would believe Project Veritas was a journalistic enterprise, and specifically that they are not news media. And so as someone who swore allegiance to the Constitution and thinks that, fundamental fairness is kind of at play if you're an FBI agent, my friend Garrett saw the same problem. I immediately saw the same problem. We both did two things. We worked for the FBI and we followed national news pretty aggressively. So when that happens, I reached out through my attorney and said, how do we get this into hands of people who can do something about it? Because it's one thing to know something. It's another thing to report it. It's a third thing for it to be actionable for somebody in real time. Like knowing that the government is screwing you over, it doesn't actually help you if you can't resist them screwing you over, if they're playing unfairly and you don't have a weapon to fight back. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing, is going to members of Congress and to my attorney, who ended up sharing it with maybe an attorney for Project Veritas. I'm not exactly sure how it came into their hands, but they were able to access this paperwork, which was basically saying nothing about the case. It didn't give anything outside of who was working it, what the name of the case was, what the violation of law that they were alleging was. It didn't even have Project Veritas' name on it, but it did say that they were a news media organization. And some other things as well that were kind of disconcerting, that didn't make sense for a journalistic enterprise, or even someone that, if you found Project Veritas to be distasteful, it sort of didn't matter, because it was pretty clear they weren't involved in extortion and blackmail and election crimes, which was what the allegation was. And so all of that didn't sit well with me. And so we sent this through, and I got an outreach from one of their reporters, journalists, undercover journalists, whatever they're called. And the request was, would you sit down and tape an interview with James O'Keefe? And this came in May of 2022. And I had already been removed from the Bureau at that point in time, but they were still paying me until June, as you stated in your intro. I kind of went, I really don't want to do this. And I don't necessarily like the person of James O'Keefe. I don't actually like the tactics that they were using at Project Veritas most of the time. But I also don't like the idea that a massive federal government comes in and steps on you and you have no weapon to fight back.
Yeah, what was the claim that that Project Veritas was doing what? I understand the Ashley, whatever it was, the diary, but from what I read, he gave it over to the police because he didn't expose it or anything.
Right.
He wasn't sure of the veracity, whether it was real or not, so he gave it to the police. So why was the FBI investigating James O'Keefe?
I mean, I think that's the $1 million question, because there's just no really good justification for it. They ended up going after like an interstate stolen property charge after a couple of people and got plea deals. I mean, none of this is what the FBI does. And none of it is what people expect their $11 billion worth of taxpayer money to go in and fund. Like, nobody thinks that's what the FBI does. They think they go after bank robberies and catch spies and stop terrorists. So
high-level stuff, right. Yeah, not parents at school board meetings, right.
One would think that would be a problem. And obviously that's you're referencing something that I brought to the American people's attention in October of 2021. That was actually the root cause of why I didn't work there in May when I was sitting there. And so here I am looking around going, I'm not a big fan of James as a human being from what I could tell. I never met the guy, but I just, didn't rub me as like, that's my kind of guy. And I talked to my wife and she was like, we signed up in this to do the right thing, regardless of what it is. So you got to go. And I'll tell you right now, like, just two men telling you that I've done some scary things. You mentioned my bio. I want to be real clear about the bio too. I wasn't a pararescue specialist. I think, at least not technically. I was a pararescue apprentice, I think is how it falls under, but the DD-214 says what it does. I didn't complete the end of the training. I did a lot of it, obviously the combat dive, and I did the jump and some other stuff. And so I have a lot of different dangerous experiences in training environments, things that people have died doing. And, the scariest things that I remember doing in the military was swimming a mile and a half underwater in the dark on scuba and trying to hit a beach, because I'm terrified of dark water and I'm terrified of being where I can't see the bottom, and you can't do either of those. So that scared the living hell out of me. That was the scariest thing I remember doing. Jumping out of a plane wasn't all that with the Army, it's pretty scary too. So I did that. But the scariest thing I ever did in my professional life was fly to Washington, D.C. and go meet with James O'Keefe in a hotel and tell him stuff about the FBI that I knew was doing something wrong. And I didn't know how far they would go to make that not be public, because they had already stepped far outside of the lines of what would made sense to me. I would have never imagined that one of my colleagues would have opened a case up because someone politically said, hey, we need to open a case on this guy because of a diary from a woman who was in like a drug rehab program. That's completely illogical to me. I can't fathom ever saying yes to that.
When that woman happens to be the daughter of the president of the United States, it becomes important.
For sure. It's definitely an eye-opening
It's not a
moment.
crime, but it's important.
It's eye-opening to think that nobody who worked around me would have considered that beforehand. And I had moments of kind of epiphanies that blew my mind. I'm sitting in my boss's office in probably March of 2022, and we're having a conversation, and I show him something on my phone, and it's a video that somebody did a Biggie Small song, and it's Hunter Biden's laptop footage. So, he's smoking crack in a sensory deprivation chamber and spanking hookers or whatever it is that Hunter Biden was doing. And, it's a funny, like 90-second little reel video that you watch. And then my boss and I kind of have a chuckle at it. One of the guys comes in, and he had been in the job about as long as me, and he was prior military and was in the Army and was a decent guy, and he was a good shooter, and he was, like kind of just a good colleague in general. And he goes, "What's that?" And I explained to him, and he goes, "Oh, is that new?" I said, "No, this story came out in October of 2020. How do you not know about this? We're years after that now." And it was completely foreign to him. And I realized how disconnected from the news cycle, the national news, and what was actually happening in like everyday Americans. I think a lot of people just didn't know anything. They're tuned out. And they didn't need to know because they were just doing their job, and they lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So what did it matter if Hunter Biden's laptop, was leaked out to the New York Post and it should have changed the results of an election? All this stuff was kind of my awakening during that time, that I just realized my colleagues, they weren't plugged in. They weren't seeing the same things that I was because they just didn't even care to look.
Didn't care. All right. So get back to James O'Keefe. So you did the interview. With him.
The goal was, the agreement was, is they were going to change my voice and put it through a modulator so that it couldn't be detected. And they were going to shield my face and delete the pixels that were around it so I couldn't be detected visually. So in theory, a shadow interview that you protect the source. And that basically failed within about 60 seconds of scrutiny by the FBI's laboratory down at Quantico. We found out afterwards. And I have the video that shows a technician matching the voice print and remodulating. Essentially, all Project Veritas did was downshift the pitch of my voice by 20%, which is correctable by a child. My voice sounds like my voice. And of course, there's endless amounts of it now, so you can easily see who I am. At the time, they had recorded versions of my voice as well, because I'd been in recorded phone calls with FBI investigators for some of the internal stuff they were trying to go after me about. So they knew who I was immediately, and it did not protect my identity at all. That didn't stop them from going after my friend Garrett O'Boyle, and they suspended him for almost 1,100 days for the video interview that I did. Now, one of the initial problems I had with James O'Keefe as a journalist, we'll call it, and we'll just broadly speaking, I asked him real specifically if he would make a statement of fact and submit an affidavit in support of Garrett O'Boyle, because the FBI publicly suspended him and removed him from his paycheck, and they cut him off mid-move. All these are policy violations. They've obviously been vindicated at this point within the last couple of weeks, because the FBI rehired him, and they don't rehire people.
Yeah, what role did he have to play in all this? I
Nothing. He accessed the file, and then I was a conduit. He asked me to help him get it to members of Congress, and I did. I did exactly what he asked, and that was the entirety of his role in it. So he had no culpability, no wrongdoing. I didn't ask him whether or not I could go do an interview, because I don't take directions from my friends. I just did it. I went and did something on my own. And for my troubles, he was suspended, and his pregnant wife, I guess his wife had just had a baby. They had a 2-week-old and 3 other children, and he was left without a home because he literally sold his home to move to a new job in the FBI. And the FBI canceled the move after he'd sold the house while he was in escrow on another house. They were in temporary lodgings. So now he's stuck with family in the middle of the winter with all of his household goods, like a moving company that the US government controlled. They put it all in storage. So they're holding on to his physical property, and they held on to it for months. I ended up writing him a check out of a donation-based Give, Send, Go fundraiser, so that he could go and rent trucks to go get his own stuff that the government wasn't going to give him. His kids didn't have their bicycles. They didn't have their coats in the winter in Wisconsin. I mean, it was really, really egregious. And so I'm glad that's been corrected of late. He didn't get any punitive damages, which is gross, but they knew it was me. And so all I asked was that James O'Keefe would write this affidavit and say, hey, James, why don't you just say, we're not going to reveal our sources, but we've never had an interaction on camera or otherwise with this person that you've named as the source of our video. Because he's not it. You can say it's not somebody and defend somebody because it's right. And that's what I asked him to do.
So after that time, did O'Keefe mention that he wanted to hire you? What happened with that, with the job?
No, I just continued to sort of use Project Veritas as sort of an outlet for some of the stuff that people brought me as a whistleblower. And so now that I'm removed from the job, this is after June, I'm suspended. I know I'm suspended forever. I went and flew up on my own dollar to go do an interview for a government job. It was another 1811 special agent job with the VA as an office of, what do they call it? Office of the Inspector General. So we were going to look for fraud and whatnot. And they showed me my office. We did this 4-hour interview. I was one of 3 people that was qualified for the job, and I was the most senior and most qualified and had veterans preference and all that. And then they just stopped calling me after telling me, hey, this is where you're going to work. And so I know the FBI stepped in and removed my ability to get another job. And so once that happened, it's like, okay, fair game. Whatever people send me, I'm going to make it very public. We're going to explain what this government does to people and what they're paying for with their tax dollars. So I brought other stories to them. There was one about a militia violent extremist symbols guide that showed that Ashley Babbitt was considered a dangerous martyr for this, patriot causes, that they thought that the Second Amendment was something that indicated you might be a domestic terrorist. If you thought that was something you should support, if you had a Gadsden flag and don't tread on me, then this is something that's problematic and the FBI might flag you as potential domestic terrorist rhetoric and all this other stuff. So we did a couple of good exposés, what Project Veritas, I think, calls smash and grab, where you're just like, here's a document, grip it and rip it, send it out to the public, let people understand what it is, post it a bunch on social media, get a couple of news stories and buzz. It turned out Ted Cruz actually kind of famously pulled his boot off, and he's got the Gonzales 1835 battle flag on the back of his Texas boots. So it's the famous cannon and the, come and take it. And he put that up on there in front of Chris Wray and said, am I a domestic terrorist? And so we had Harmeet Dillon sharing these stories, and, they went big, and nobody knew it was coming from me because I wasn't a public figure. So we did some work with this right up until I did a big interview with Dan Bongino, which happened in the end of September of 2022. And I kind of like stepped out into the public and, put my name and my face and my own words to my claims of government malfeasance.
Okay, so there was never a job with Project Veritas, I guess.
No, nothing had ever come up. In fact, it came up over dinner specifically. So this was, I guess, maybe the weirdest part of how that happened. I got a phone call. I was on my way out to go meet with Bongino. And so he put a couple of pleas out on his radio station and his radio show and his podcast saying, somebody, whoever this whistleblower is, would you please step forward? And so people can see your face and know that it's not all bad and give a voice to this and, be powerful. And I had a journalist named Carrie Pickett connect me with Bongino. She asked me directly. She sent me these clips and said, this is Bongino specifically saying he's going to give you the protection of his microphone. He and I have a 45-minute conversation as I'm in the middle of selling my house in New Mexico. And so in the middle of September, almost the end of September, I sold my home in New Mexico, which was beautiful. It was on 2 acres. We're right up against the mountains. I mean, it was really a dream location. And I walked away from the closing table, got in my truck, drove down to the airport in El Paso and flew to Miami and taped this first interview. And while I was en route, I got delayed in Dallas overnight. And I get a phone call from all these Project Veritas folks, and they're panicking. They're like, just blow off the interview with Bongino. Like, we're going to give you a big story. We'll help you raise a ton of money. Like, we're going to help you. Like, we want to tell your story first.
Oh.
And I said, and they said, we're going to put James on the phone with you. Can he call you directly? I said, he can. I mean, he has my number. But I told somebody that I was going to go give an interview, and I gave my word and I made a decision. And that's why I'm in this mess in the first place.
And I'm on my way.
My word and I make a decision, I go do it.
So I understand there's a lawsuit currently, or maybe it's an old lawsuit between you and James or Project Veritas. Give us some background on that, if you can.
Sure. So I was deposed on July the 29th in a lawsuit that I am not a party to. So Dr. Bob, I am not involved in that lawsuit in any way, shape, or form. I have nothing to do with it. And I was deposed for 7 hours. Took me away from my day job of being a podcast guy. Had to go out there.
It's a lawsuit. Who versus who?
So it started off that Project Veritas sued James O'Keefe.
Oh.
And I believe it was a breach of contract,
Oh, yeah.
contract
Okay.
or, violation of ND. I don't know what it was. It wasn't my lawsuit, but
Yeah.
they sued him when he left for OMG.
Right.
And then he
right.
countersued for whatever the heck he countersued for. And then he's been desperate to raise money and do all the things that he does. So he's been taking
That I know.
depositions and expanding that third-party fact witness, sort of authority that they have in the federal court system. And he's been interviewing people on 4K video feeds and setting up a videographer in the room to do these remote video depositions, and then taking tiny snippets out of it. So I just had a video that went out on X, and we did 7 hours. Probably 90%
if you're not a party to the lawsuit, you can just not show up for a deposition. You don't have to do it.
So I was subpoenaed and served with a subpoena from a federal court, and my attorney said that I needed to show up for that. I guess we could have fought it, but at the end of the day, we were considered to be relevant. So I showed up there, and all they did was read me my tweets, which I don't think have anything to do with Project Veritas, and I'm confident they have very little to do with OMG founding or whatever their contract dispute is. And they read me tweets for almost 7 hours. Now, during that 7 hours, there were a few minutes of substance where they questioned whether or not I could protect a source as a journalist. I make my living as a podcaster now, and I break real stories on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So I'm both regular media and, non-traditional media. And then they asked me questions about my marital status with my wife and whether or not this was the big salacious thing that James decided to put out on social media, whether or not I talk dirty to my wife of 12 years. Who I've known for 16.
No, nobody talks dirty to their wife after 12 years. Maybe in the first year or two.
It seems really straightforward. And my contention is something really straightforward. It's like, look, this is the mother of my children. And just because you're a child, and I do think James acts very childishly, and you have, no experience with what I'm talking about. My wife and I have gone through hell and back. She was pregnant and homeless with me when we had 3 other children, and we're waiting for our number 4. We were staying with my parents, her in-laws, for 6 months, which was absolutely an atrocious scenario. I watched her cry herself to bed every night for 6 months. This is someone that is, I don't get real mushy about romance. My wife is the person that made me the human being that I am today. And but for her influence in my life, I'm probably not, 1, the man that I am today, and probably 2, I might be dead because I make bad decisions by myself. So luckily, I have this human being in my life that influences a lot of what I do and made me a better human being. I don't talk dirty to my wife. And so if that's like novel information for somebody in a Twitter post.
What bearing that would have on Project Veritas versus OMG or James O'Keefe is ridiculous. You sat there for 7 hours. I've been in depositions, and I tend to enjoy them because I do things that annoy the attorney and the company or whoever it is that's trying to sue me. So I go into a deposition with a different attitude than most people. Okay.
I considered it a blood sport for whatever it's worth. I mean, they asked me questions, what did you mean by this tweet? And I go, okay. So then I'll just explain the tweet. It's like, well, it looks like Spanky Pants 6754 was saying, fill in the blank. And then this person responded, and then I said this.
Right.
What is your question?
What's your question?
It was absurd on its face. The majority of it was just a waste of time.
Because I tried to hold it all together when the board insisted that the CFO report to the board and not to James. So I was involved on a daily basis, calling his investors, calling the board, and I even called James's father to tell James, that to advise him that James is not going to win in this in any way, and he should just go back to PV and adhere by the rules. Your 501c3, this is not your money to spend. It's an organization. It's a charitable IRS charitable organization, and there are rules that you have to. I'm not a rule guy, but I know when there are certain rules you have to adhere to. And his father thought that I was an idiot and James is going to win. So I said, okay. So I just stopped everything. It was beyond me to figure out how to keep it all together, and it wasn't all together, and it's still in the lawsuits. Terrible. Okay, enough of James O'Keefe now. Enough Project Veritas.
Let me add one little thing to this, because I think it actually is kind of funny. I've met both of you. I've probably spent almost as much time around you as I have around James, which is not a ton. And I used to read people for a living, and I used to do all kinds of work where you'd see people in sensitive scenarios. And You seem like an utterly capable, intelligent, sensible person. I thought our conversation was really genuine. And I immediately disliked James O'Keefe when I met him for the first time because he kept me waiting in a hotel lobby for 12 hours before debriefing me as this the source of this first video we ever did. And I never thought anything more of him after the fact. So I even made the point while I was talking to his executive directors when they were considering me for a position. And that only came out of the dinner that you and I had. So people don't know this, but December 2022, James asked me, said, I'd really like you to meet this donor. He wants to meet you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh, okay. Well, I don't really want to meet anybody. I'm fine. I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life right now. I have no job. And I was convinced by the intermediary who worked for Project Veritas, like, no, this might be a good contact for you and you should go and make this. And they want to meet you. And so I said, okay, fine. I'm in the business of discussing opportunities with people. So I'll go meet Dr. Bob. So I did. I drive out and, I got there earlier on time, as you can attest.
I recall. Right.
We had a very nice conversation. We had a James show up later. We had this interaction, and then he pitched this idea that you were going to fund a position that I'd never heard of. We'd never discussed it prior. So that was the first I ever heard of it.
The reason I wanted to meet you is because he told me that he was interested. He did background on you, and I looked at your background. I said, yeah, it sounds perfect for a senior administrator, a senior director of undercover investigation. I said, perfect, but I'd like to meet him if I'm going to pay for it. And that, he was asking me to fund the position. I fund a lot of things. And at that time, Project Veritas, I thought, was doing very good work. And it was good work, exposing PBS, exposing Acorn. He did a lot of good stuff. So I said, sure, I'd like to meet the guy. And so you had no idea that he was thinking of hiring you. He never met. Okay.
No, I had no idea what I was walking into, where I was walking into, anything about it. Other than I drove 7 hours to go meet somebody, and I'm glad that I met you. And you're a very nice man, and so I've been appreciative of that. But the funniest thing for me was, it seemed obvious from the outside. Now I learned about Project Veritas falling apart like everybody else did. I saw a video posted online, and then I watched a board meeting where people were tearing up, and James was doing his theatrics, and it occurred to me that he was burning his own baby, his own sort of creation. And it was the opposite of what you do when you're a CEO and you're involved in leadership, because I've watched other, CEOs and senior people and public folks, make mistakes or get drummed out of their own companies. And if they do it right, they walk away for a year or two, they take their lumps for whatever reasons, and then they come back in with a glorious return and they're better than ever. And they do Steve Jobs, and they sell an iPhone to everybody on the planet.
Let's get back to your time at the FBI. Mm-hmm. In your 6 years with the Bureau, you had been highly trained in numerous investigative methods and combat tactics, and you had earned a number of awards based on superior performance. Now, I recall you refused to take the COVID shot. Were there other agents that also refused that shot too?
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
And were you suspended because of that or because of things that later came about?
Well, that's the $1 million question as well. You're getting just the crux of the matter here. The DOJ argued that I wasn't removed because of the COVID shots, and therefore it wasn't an equal opportunity employment complaint, and it wasn't a failure to accommodate, and so that I had no sort of I had no standing to say that the COVID vaccine refusal was the justification for me being removed. And then, interestingly, simultaneously, the whistleblower adjudication group, which is called OARM, and they're out of the Department of Justice, they also said that there was no reason to believe that my whistleblower activity was the reason that I was removed. And so I was found in this weird position. I'll just tell people the timeline, and then they can make their own decision. Because I'm the sensible guy. I just think that sometimes human beings do things for more than one reason. And that if you only can say one reason, you're probably never going to get to the truth. That's FBI agents oftentimes will have.
But right away they said
motives.
You weren't removed because of refusal to take the COVID, and you weren't removed because of whistleblower activity. So
that's right.
Why were you removed?
Oh, it's just a mystery. Nobody knows. I went from being an award-winning and promoted every year on schedule. If you're an FBI agent, you start off as what's called a GS-10. That's the general scale. Right. And so you're a GS-10, and then you're a 10-2 and a 10-3, and then an 11-4, I think, and then a 12-1, a 12-2, and then you become a GS-13, which is the tenured rank or paid grade of an FBI agent. And then you step out for the rest of your career if you don't go into management. And so I was a GS-13. I got promoted every year on time the way I was supposed to. Mm-hmm. I got awards on average at least once a year, and some of them were for small things, and some of them were for bigger things. I saved a guy's life in 2017 at the end of the year. And then they gave me an award for it in 2021 because it was sitting on someone's desk since 2018 and no one ever thought to give it to me. But I did CPR for a man who was in his 60s that fell dead on the ground and nobody was doing CPR. So I brought him back to life. I zapped him with the AED and took control of the situation. I had the background as a paramedic. So we saved him, and I got an award from someone who was my own pay grade saying good job. So anyway, but I did decent work. And in fact, just before I was removed, I got awarded what was called a Category D cash award. So $3,000, it's a nice amount of money if you're working in government. It doesn't say one thing or the other. But they used to do these things that were called quality step increases. They basically promoted you an extra year in advance. Then they stopped doing those. And the stand-in was this Category D cash award, which is what I got. So I got, like a promoted above grade, above peers. And then 18 months later or less, the same woman who signed me off on that is the one who's signing my paperwork to remove me from the FBI because I was theoretically no longer could hold a security clearance. So something happened, and here's the timeline. In September, the Biden administration, this is 2021, the Biden administration comes out, COVID vaccine mandate, everybody must get it. I was right at the front. My wife and I had been aggressively growing closer in the Catholic Church. She had been an atheist for most of her life, or agnostic, and didn't really participate in religion. When we moved to New Mexico, my wife began RCIA classes, which meant she was becoming a Catholic. She was going through all the training and the theology and the catechism. And the year prior, we had gone to the March for Life. So we were big on that, especially since we'd had children and we had 3 kids out there in New Mexico. So my wife was very moved in the pro-life sphere. And so we were reading all the same things that everybody else was about the COVID shots, the way they were developed, their possibility of affecting fertility and so on, a lot of unknowns. So we were no-goes on that based on religious beliefs. And I wrote it up within days of the mandate being stated, not the deadline, mind you, the announcement of the mandate. I'm in the door as probably one of the first 50 religious accommodation requests in the FBI. Now, they ended up getting about 3,000 or something like that. They might have gotten 2,800 or some number, but they came in over the next few weeks while people figured it out. I was right out of the gate, 3-page affidavit signed by a notary. Here's my beliefs. I'm not willing to compromise on them. Keep me on or fire me. I don't care. Under no circumstances am I going to comply with this mandate. And then if you can accommodate me, great. I'd love to keep working here. So I did that in September. In the beginning of October, I get an email from one of my colleagues, and it is an email forwarded chain, and it originated with the assistant director of counterterrorism and the assistant director of criminal investigations in the FBI at FBI headquarters, and then it goes all the way down the chain to the boss of my field office, and then his underling, and then his underling who's a manager, and then me, who was not in the chain of this manager, but he sent it over. And he goes, "Can you believe this?" And as I said, the reason I knew about Project Veritas is because I follow national news. The reason that I knew that the attorney general had just gone in front of Congress 5 days earlier and said that we're not going to pursue any parents at school board meetings as terrorists is because I watched the news. Yeah. And so I get this email, and it just says that we're going to be assigning a threat tag. That's a way of tagging data and information. And it was EDU officials. And that meant that there was any threats to school board members was going to be investigated by the FBI, and it was signed on by 2 people, the Criminal Investigation Division and the Counterterrorism Investigation Division. And that led me to believe, like a regular person, that the CTD, the Counterterrorism Division, was interested in this, and it was in direct contradiction to what the Attorney General had said. And he just said it 5 days ago in front of a hearing.
And then what did you do with that information?
That's the great question. I immediately scheduled a meeting with my congresswoman. Her name was Yvette Harrell, and she was she was a representative of the 2nd District of New Mexico, and her office in Las Cruces was just down the street from my office. So I think I got that on a Monday or a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, I'm in her office with her director of, I think he was a liaison for law enforcement. He was a retired state police officer, awesome guy, Gene Galassini, and then their community relations outreach gal who coordinated the office. And so I sat down with 2 of her staffers, and I walked through like 3 hours of problems in the FBI that I had been making complaints about internally for years.
I was going to ask you that. So you've complained internally through the chain of command or whatever.
Starting in 2017, I started my first whistleblower activity. So I joined the Bureau in 2016. Within a year, I'm already making whistleblower complaints as are defined by law. Now, nobody ever heard about them because they were internal. And so that happened for years, including drafted statements by attorneys that went off to the Office of General Counsel and the director's office. So I was putting stuff, I was a problem, if you will, in that I thought you're supposed to do things the right way. That was my
That's a mistake.
Novel.
So to this day,
I brought this all to them.
So you were put on administrative leave without pay. Why wouldn't they just fire you?
Well, it got even dumber than that. And that's because I think the FBI was being run by people who didn't know what to do. And I think they actually probably didn't have their heart in the game. The COVID policies were being directed by a guy named Lee Loftus, who is the AAG at the DOJ. There's too many acronyms, but he was like the Associate Attorney General or Assistant Attorney General.
Yeah.
At Department of Justice. And so he's pushing out this stuff. He's part of the administrative end of things. The FBI is doing their version of it, which wasn't in compliance with the rest of the federal government. And they told me a couple days after I put this whistleblower complaint into my congresswoman, they said, look, as of November 2023, you can no longer come back into the office unless you agree to put on a mask every time you come in, if you socially distance 6 feet from everybody, and if you test for COVID every 72 hours and make sure that there's an active uploaded negative COVID test for you every 72 hours. And I go, look, guys, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm a paramedic. I have a top secret clearance. I've got 280 hours of sick leave. I've done literally thousands of nasal swabs in the clinical environment, and none of you have. And I am not going to prophylactically test for a disease I show no symptoms of simply because I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
Yeah.
You're nuts. So I'm not going to do that. What do you want to do next? And they go, well, you can't come into the office. I said, well, I'll see you on Monday and you can kick me out then. Now, in the meantime, my boss also, a couple of days prior to giving me this announcement, he goes, you're a whistleblower, right? And I found out that there was a call from my office up to Washington, D.C. And they had a call with somebody in D.C. out to Kansas City. And the chief division counsel, the top lawyer for the Kansas City division, was a national expert on employment law and things that they had questions about. And they said, hey, we got this guy in New Mexico, and he's a real problem. He's a whistleblower, but he's also refusing to take the COVID shot. What should we do with him? And so he told headquarters, and I know this because he told me, he said, you should promote him. So they didn't.
That's fantastic.
He's amazing. He's a great guy. He lost his job eventually, not long afterwards, for still talking to me. And was walked out after 27 years of being an FBI agent. This story gets really ridiculous. So
wow.
We're going to keep. So consider this. Now I know that they know I'm a whistleblower, which they had no business to know. I know that they have access to my medical records and saying that I'm not going to get this shot. And then November 23rd, I get a phone call at 3 a.m. Dr. Bob, I got called in the middle of the night to go join a junior agent on the last day that I was allowed to go into the office without my, COVID paperwork in order, to go do an investigation into the death of a federal prisoner at a county jail because the Marshal Service rented out some space in Otero County. And can you go help him do a death investigation? He's never done one. So
your last day. This is your last day when you're not allowed to.
That. Yeah. It was just like they were going to kick me
3
out
in
of
the
the office
morning.
afterwards.
Okay.
That's right. So I drive to the office. I get there. We got 2 cups of coffee. We sit in the car. We drive 90 minutes down to the federal prison. We're there before the sun comes up, obviously. We talk to the warden. We talk to the guards. And we have a federal inmate who was interdicted by Border Patrol. He's got a gunshot wound in the back of his head in the cell. It looks like it's healed over for multiple days. We don't know what that's about. And he basically keeled over dead after attacking another inmate. And it's in the COVID isolation ward.
What a story.
So
and you were supposed
hours,
to investigate that.
Yeah. So for 12 hours, we interviewed all of the inmates who could see anything from their doors. We interviewed his cellmate. We interview all the guards that saw anything throughout the entire night. We put them all separately and get their sworn statements and whatever that's going to be. And then we go and investigate the physical area. We check out the body. Yeah. He's never been around a dead body in the FBI capacity. It's not very common for FBI agents in general. So we, wait for the coroner. I help the coroner. We move the body around. We do an inspection of it. It's probably my 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th body that I've dealt with since I was working on the Indian reservation. Mm-hmm. And I've been a paramedic, so I've been around dead bodies. So we do our thing. We look at it. I note the wound. I, kind of say it's inconclusive from what we see. Could be any number of things. We're going to wait on a toxicology report. We're going to wait for whatever the medical examiner finds out after an autopsy. And then we go back to the office after 12 hours of sitting in the COVID isolation ward. And my boss tells me I can't come in on Monday. And then I go to Thanksgiving. Wow. And then I came back on Monday because I told him I would.
Okay, so they told you're on leave. You can't come into the office. You're not going to get any pay. But they never told you why. They never told you.
They said that unless I was in compliance with their COVID policy, then I couldn't come into the office. So my boss and I worked out a deal where I would take personal leave, and I was basically on vacation until something got sorted out.
Right.
And that was fine
until the
for a
vacation
period of
ends.
time.
Right.
Yeah. So I went through the entire month of December on my own personal leave. I filed a religious accommodation request because I thought it was immediately discriminatory that they wanted me to wear a mask and a test and all this other stuff. This is December of 2021, where everybody was getting COVID, including my boss's wife. The day that I showed up in the office, he's like, my wife has the shots. She's home with COVID right now.
And
it
she's
doesn't make
had
any
the
sense.
shot. Yeah.
Yeah. So we knew it was dumb. I take my personal leave. After January, I've got to requalify on my handgun. Every quarter in the FBI, you qualify on your handgun so you can still carry it. I'm still a federal agent. I'm on leave. I still carry a gun every day and a badge and my credentials.
Oh,
so
really?
Theoretically,
They let you keep your badge and everything.
for sure. Yeah. There was no finding against me. Nobody had accused me of anything. I was just on leave because I wasn't going to comply with the policy. And as long as I didn't come into the office, I wasn't violating the policy.
I see.
So
I see.
I go in on, I think, January the 9th or January the 10th, something like that. And I go do a shoot. Now we're in an open air range that's 50 yards wide. It's 400 yards deep. We're in the middle of the freaking desert. It's at White Sands Missile Range.
You got to wear a mask.
Small arms range. No mask, no nothing.
Okay.
We're just, it's like 5 guys out there shooting in the desert against paper targets in the blazing hot sun of the desert. And at the end of it, I go home and that's it. And I drove out there in my personal vehicle. I shot my personally owned weapons, FBI ammo, but my own guns. And I took my own personal time. I was paying my own way as a guy on leave. And this is something that the FBI agents regularly do. If maybe you're out of the area, you go and jump in and do a qual if you need to while you're on leave. No big deal. You don't charge the Bureau for your time.
Yeah. Okay.
You should because it's work, but I didn't. And I get a call that night from my boss, and he just says, "Hey, did you have an uploaded COVID test when you were out there shooting on the range?" And I said, "No, I was just getting a qualification in. I'm still on leave." And he goes, "So am I to understand that you did not upload a COVID test and that you are out of compliance?" And I go, "I guess. I just went out there on my leave in the middle of the desert, and I went and did some shooting for an hour." So okay, yeah. I get an email. Not only did they take me off leave from then on out, and then I was on unpaid, what they called AWOL, absent without leave, because I wasn't showing up even though they were demanding me to.
Yep.
And I wasn't doing the COVID compliance. They actually docked me pay for that day. So even though I was on leave, I didn't get leave. And even though I did work, did training, they didn't pay me for the training. So that was fun. And from then until March the 4th, I was out of the office unpaid. All of this is over COVID. And during that time, I continued my firearms training like I normally did. I lived in the desert. I lived near public land where you could go shoot. And I was out shooting. And on one day, and people can check it on their own if they want, they can go to YouTube or Rumble. If you type in Sonoma Ranch, you'll find the body cam footage. And if you type in Sonoma Ranch, or if you put why I got suspended, roll the tape, I think it's the name of the video, you can see the body cam footage and the explanation of it, including all the, the pictures. But essentially, I talked to a cop for 3 minutes in the desert where he said, people can hear you shooting. And I said, okay. And he said, would you like to shoot somewhere else? And I said, no. And the law doesn't require me to. Here's the state law. And he said, honestly, I don't even know what the state law is. You're good. If I have any other issues or somebody else calls, I'll just send a sergeant to talk to you. And I identified myself as an FBI agent, obviously. Totally what I would refer to as non-derogatory. We were friendly. He was joking and laughing when he drove off. And that was it.
But he was told to tell you to stop shooting.
Somebody he drove from there was a school that was like a half mile in the other direction on the backside of a hill.
I see.
And he drove from the school because he could hear my gunshots.
Yeah.
And while we're on body camera footage, he says, I said, it's not like people don't shoot here. And he goes, no, I hear it every day. And I'm like, why are we talking?
Yeah.
I don't understand. This seems kind of silly. So whether the FBI orchestrated that or not, I don't know. Whether somebody knew that I was out there, I don't know. And I don't get conspiratorial. I'll just assume it was a happenstance that an officer responded and nothing bad happened. I had a pleasant conversation with a man who probably, doesn't realize that he ended my career. And then they immediately shared that body cam footage with everybody in my office, the secretaries, the probationary agents, the new kid who just got there that went to the prison with me to do the investigation, the other supervisors, people that are on the other squad secretary, like everybody saw it apparently. And my boss rolled around. And the reason he said he showed it to everybody, and direct quote from my paperwork, was that he wanted to see if everybody else thought I was being an asshole. His words.
That's what they spend their time doing. Trying to show that you're an asshole. Okay, so it's been many years without pay, and they haven't fired you. You're suspended. Why aren't you suing the Justice Department?
We're actively involved in a lawsuit. I am, along with 35 others. And we just had mediation. What is today? Thursday? So a week ago this Friday. Yeah. We had mediation, and we were 1,000 miles apart, and they're not interested in it. But it even gets dumber than that, because you'll indulge me. They investigated. They didn't investigate me on that day. I came back on March 4th. My boss immediately started retaliating against me. They moved me to another squad. They gave me no work to do. They literally put me in a desk in the corner. I'm not exaggerating. There's the copier. There's your desk. Nobody else sits over there. Go sit in the corner and do nothing for 6 weeks. So I sat and did nothing for 6 weeks on a federal payroll, which is crazy. I had a boss ask me, like, what do you want to do, for cases? And I go, I don't want to be on the squad. I actually moved out here to work criminal work. I was at an Indian reservation. And if I can't do that, I'll do whatever you ask me to do, but I don't have a preference. I don't like doing this. I already and I'm not read in for national security work. They moved me to a squad that I couldn't actually work on without supervision. Somebody would have to sit with me in the skiff to be able to look at classified documents. So that was really weird. And all of that goes on. And then after I realized that my boss had shared this video footage, because people were talking to me about it, like, hey, saw you on body cam, like, hey, saw you out shooting in the desert. It's like, what? I called the Office of Internal Affairs, their intake section, and I reported that my boss had abused his authority because there was no investigation into me.
Yeah.
There was no reason. There was no law enforcement purpose for him looking at it. And there certainly wasn't anything outside of like reputational harm for him to share it with my colleagues.
Right.
So I reported that. They investigated him for 30 days. They closed the investigation on April the 15th, and they opened one into me on April the 15th. We went into the Easter weekend of 2022. On the Monday following that, they took my badge and my gun because in 3 days, they were able to decide that I was guilty of unprofessional conduct, and apparently they worked over Easter weekend. Now, for me, this was a very spiritual thing because my wife got baptized that weekend and she became a Catholic, or she was baptized into the church. And so the two of us had this really interesting moment where it's like, I don't know what's going on, but we're obviously on a real interesting path that God's leading us on here. And they're taking my badge and my gun, and we know why it is. It's because I was a whistleblower and because I said no to COVID. And now all the results of that are coming to fruition. So that was the last time I was in an FBI office, was April the 18th. They continued on considering me an FBI employee until April of 2023, even though I was unpaid. And at that point, they threatened me with a felony investigation for something that was ridiculous. Like, they said I did felony tax evasion of a thing that it was not. There's a concept of a solvent trap that I had sent to the office, and the ATF showed up at my house to intimidate me. And then they said, we're going to recommend you for termination from the FBI based on you not doing the interview, which they canceled because I recorded the person who called me on the phone, and I published her 1 hour phone call with me where she sounds absolutely absurd and ridiculous, like an absolute crazy person. And everybody, like, it's been listened to tens of thousands of times, got a couple 100,000 views over on social media, totally embarrassed the FBI. And they just said, well, you're going to be terminated. So as of April of 2023, I quote unquote resigned from a job that hadn't paid me in 14 months via podcast and email. And that's how dumb it was.
Was that part of the deal, that if you resigned, they would not prosecute you or something?
No. So I was being investigated by the Office of the Internal Affairs, or what's called Office of Professional Responsibility. They're kind of interchangeable terms in the FBI. So the people that were investigating me only had authority to do an investigation into me if I was an FBI employee.
Oh.
And they lost it the minute that I wasn't. And so, that was kind of like a strategic move. There was no upside to try to like stick around and see what they would do.
Yeah.
And there was no real downside because I hadn't been paid in over a year. And it was pretty obvious I didn't work there by any reasonable decision. And so one of the parts of my lawsuit is constructive termination, which is to say, I didn't work there, but they claimed that I didn't, that I wasn't
they claimed
fired,
you quit, but and you did quit because they forced you to quit. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, now you talked to your rep from the House of Representatives, and what did you report to her? If you could tell me the things that they were doing wrong at the FBI. So what was your whistleblowing about, basically?
So it started off that I was driven by that email, which was saying that the Attorney General was committing perjury, and that's really simple. It's a straightforward, easily to determine, was he in fact committing perjury? He said they were not going to use counterterrorism tools and methods on parents at school board meetings, and that was because there was this huge public thing about the National Association of School Boards asking the White House asking the DOJ, blah blah blah. That email that I got was sort of proof that they were in fact doing something. There were only two real possible outcomes: either he was lying to Congress, or he didn't know what the FBI was doing and they were operating outside of his purview. And so it's either sort of malfeasance or incompetence, neither of which is appropriate for an attorney general. So that's what I reported. And by the way, they could just ignore it. They could have said, thank you, we received it, we're moving on. That's not what happened. It went very public in November of 2021. Jim Jordan, I think on November the 16th, publicly announced that I was one of two whistleblowers that brought that document forward to them. They published it. They do this whole big thing about weaponization, which was a legitimate problem. And then I'm sitting in there for the other couple hours talking about other things I saw. One of them was the abuse of the FBI's FISA program. I had worked counterintelligence for 2 years, so I could talk specifically about FISA 702, which is always renewed. Everybody says we need it for some reason. And I believe that it explicitly exists to do reverse targeting and that it is almost always abused. It is raw FISA material the FBI never had until the last 2 months of the Obama administration. It was a new concept. By the time I showed up, it was standard, but it was not something the FBI has done for its entire, whatever, 100-year history. So they have access to raw intelligence data from signal intercepts like phones and text messages and emails.
Including the American citizens.
Lots of American citizens. Right. Yeah, they refer to it as incidental contact. I'll explain what 702 is because a lot of people don't know, and it's worth knowing if you got time for the detail. But 702 FISA is meant to target overseas people when they are overseas. And in theory, they have to either be aligned with a terrorist organization or an intelligence operation. And so that's real specific. The problem is that they allowed them to do what are called hops. So if an intel officer is talking to you, then they can investigate you with the same capabilities of that FISA.
I see.
And if I'm talking to you, then they can get to me. So because of an intel officer overseas, then I can be spied on. And so they have the right to do that. Well, how do I know who to nominate for it? I go into their contacts, and that's explicitly forbidden by law. You're not allowed to go look for your targets that you could actually investigate domestically by going through 702 FISA, and yet that's how it's used all the time. And so I reported that, and of course, this became a big deal about FISA oversight, and they went through all these processes, and Chris Wray admitted there were several million bad queries done in the FISA database, and they cleaned it up, and they were happy to report there were only a couple 100,000 in 2023 after they went and cleaned up the problem. So those are all violations of our Fourth Amendment rights, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think they're justifiable. So a lot of my whistleblower activity was pointing out malfeasance or just stepping over the Bill of Rights. We had a thing about the First Amendment and the caveats that exist for people to do domestic terrorism investigations. The FBI puts a caveat at the beginning of every case that is domestic terrorism, and they say as follows: we do not solely investigate any matter because of a First Amendment protected activity like practice of religion or freedom of speech or freedom to assemble. And then they go out and they just draft a case based on somebody's speech.
Right.
But they put a caveat. They said they don't do it. So that's literally the only protection, is that they said they're not doing it for this reason, and then they go do it for that reason. And Americans will never find out because these are intelligence-based. They're not based on an accusation of crime. So there never has to be a criminal charge. They can literally spy on you forever, and they can continue to predicate it based on your actions, which are First Amendment protected, and you'll never know because it's all classified. Yeah. And so I was explaining this, and their minds are blown. And nobody knows what to do with that.
Edu official mean? What does that refer to? I've seen that around.
Say it again.
The tag edu official, pound EDU OFFICIAL.
Yeah. So pound EDU official or hashtag EDU official. It's the tag that the FBI was putting on parents that they were investigating at school boards. So the way that it would work is somebody would go and protest at a school board. Yeah. And then someone who didn't like what they did would call the FBI's 800 tip line in West Virginia. And they would say, this person is issuing, threats or is being nasty, or I don't like them and they're a meanie and they don't think that trans people belong in my, bathroom or whatever. They would say their thing.
I see.
And so that would come down to the FBI field office, and then someone who is an FBI agent would go out and investigate. And so they would probably query that person. They might do some records checks. They might go knock on their door and ask them for an interview. And then all those files that they accumulated, the records checks and the bank records, if they were to get those, any voluntary interviews or any recordings or statements, would all get tagged with this sort of like hashtag. And it's just a way for an intel analyst to go in and type in EDU officials and pull up all the cases that have references to that particular threat. And the threat was exclusively parents who were protesting at school boards that theoretically were threatening members of a school board, which is crazy. I mean, there's a small parameter under which the FBI could investigate parents. And it would have to be if they did an actual actionable true threat, according to true threat doctrine. This is all case law. And then it would also have to be over interstate wires. So it would have to be on the internet. It'd have to be via phone. They'd have to email, fax, text,
otherwise,
whatever.
it's a state issue. It's a state
It's just not an issue at all. It's just below the FBI regardless. Unless you're politically motivated, which we know they were. And the Project Veritas example is another good example of that being politically motivated.
Now, getting back to the whistleblower standard, aren't you protected by the various laws to protect, I think the federal laws protecting whistleblowers? Shouldn't you still be paid?
In theory, but there's no teeth to them, and there's no requirement for what happens when someone calls themselves a whistleblower. So what's fun is that I'm a quote unquote whistleblower if you talk to Democrats. And the reason is because the FBI sends all of their whistleblower complaints to this group called the Office of Recruitment and Management, Attorney Recruitment and Management. So there's a DOJ entity that deals with FBI whistleblowers. The idea of whistleblower protection is nominal. It doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any penalty for violating it. There's no recourse. And the people who decide whether or not the FBI will consider you a whistleblower work for the DOJ, part one. Yeah. And their job is not whistleblower investigations. Their job is not internal affairs. They're not some like third party outside, apolitical entity. They are the Office of Attorney Recruitment and Management. Their job is to recruit new DOJ employees. That's what they do. And then as a side gig, they also investigate whether or not you're a whistleblower. It's completely insane. And it's set up almost as kind of like a FU, if you will, because when you go and you look, you're like, wait, what do? You recruit other attorneys. You go to, law, law school job fairs. Yeah. And you say, come work for the FBI.
And what does that have to do with knowing about whistleblower laws?
Nothing.
But what you're saying is, even though there's laws, regulations to protect whistleblowers, basically they're not enforced, or there are no such things. There's no protection.
There's no protection at all. There's nothing that happens. There's no recourse to it. And so you go and you appeal your case to this OIRM, and I did. And then they said, well, we can't get to it right now. We can't get to it right now. They gave me multiple 60-day, 90-day kickbacks. And after almost a year, they finally said, we've reviewed your case and we just don't think you're a whistleblower. Because there's no way that anybody would have known you're a whistleblower. We didn't investigate it, by the way. We didn't ask anybody. We didn't query any comms. We didn't do discovery.
Yeah.
No investigation. Just based on the facts that you laid out, which you don't have access to the communications of your boss or anybody else, we've decided you're not a whistleblower, so you're not. Wow. And so then you're not subjected to protections, and it's a setup to lose. Less than 1% of the people who go into that process actually win. So this is something that I've discovered in the course of doing a podcast, is that there are literally dozens of FBI whistleblowers on any given day that you'll never hear about, because they don't do what I did. They don't go public with the story. They don't go to the news. They don't go on Dan Bongino's podcast. They just wait for the process to be fixed. And Dr. Bob, the other thing that I did that I don't think anyone's done before, and I'll just take credit for it because I think it's fair, and I've had this conversation with retired agents, nobody else defined victory the way that I did. Everybody else wants their job back. They want their back pay, and they want to be able to be made whole and go back into the fold and be part of the FBI and retire. I was 6 years into a career that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to finish when I started it, because I looked around and I went, this is not the best place I've ever worked. The best place I ever worked was Warner Brothers, whatever it's worth. It was awesome. Like, I had a really good time working for Warner Brothers, and I made decent money, and I had a cool job office, and I could look over, the highway, and I could go hiking at night, and I lived in Los Angeles, and it was really pretty, and they had pretty girls that worked there, and I was a single guy riding a motorcycle into work, and it was great. So that was a great job for me. Minimal responsibilities.
What were you doing? I could do was within my. You were doing tax related or finance related jobs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was doing financial analysis, which is boring as all get out. But I got to go sit next to Jesse. I got to go sit to Uncle Jesse and the crew that was on the Warner Brothers movie lot. I worked at the movie lot every day. People took tours of where I worked.
Wow.
So, that's kind of fun. There's a big Bugs Bunny made out of gold that's 7 feet tall standing outside of the door. And I go up to the top, and I worked on the 7th floor most days. And on the opposite side, I was in the little legal department because they needed a desk for me. And on the other side of the atrium where the elevators were was the writers for 2.5 Men and the writers for The Big Bang Theory. So every Wednesday, whoever Charlie Sheen's love interest was going to be would come and knock on my door, because none of them were literate, I think. And it would be like some beautiful 6 foot tall woman, banging on the glass doors and asking me where they were supposed to go, even though there were 50 signs with plain English and arrows pointing them to where they go. So I'd have to escort them to their interviews.
Well, she was clearly blonde.
Blondes, redheads, brunettes, it's irrelevant. It's just Hollywood. So
that's
I had a good job there. That was fun. I left it to go be in the military. I joined the FBI, and there were parts of it that were really enjoyable and really, really fun and really neat. And there was a lot of frustration, like every other government job. And so when they, kicked me out, and I'm told I can't come back in for things that I know I'm justified. And I said it at the time. I told my bosses, I told their bosses, I told the senior directors at headquarters via email, you're going to be on the wrong side of this when the lawsuits come down. You guys are going to be found to be not in compliance with Title VII very clearly. And also, you're on the wrong side of this morally, and you should be ashamed of yourselves because this is going to come out on the wrong, and this is going to age like milk. And it did. And in fact, the guy who did all the COVID policies for the FBI, he was the deputy assistant director of human resources. His name is Spencer Evans. He was just fired 3 weeks ago because of me pointing it out to the FBI director what he did during the COVID stuff. And he was fired for COVID policy overreach that happened in 2021 and 2022. So I've already been, vindicated.
Yeah.
But everyone else wants the job back. That's what they did.
Yeah,
what I wanted to do was make sure that the FBI and the DOJ knew how crappy they were, and everyone else did too. So I was going to go out and make it hurt for them as much as it did for our family. And I never cared about whether or not I would get reinstated. So I redefined the terms of victory. And that's maybe something that came out of my military mindset. It's like, as long as the other guy hurts more than you, you're winning.
Well, actually,
so we did.
It's not just hurting. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's making things better. You wanted to improve. I assume the FBI get rid of all the people or the procedures that were basically illegal or doing unethical things. Now, I understand that Kash Patel, the current director of the FBI, contacted you to learn about the problems that you had been reporting about the FBI. Now, did he contact you before or after he became the director?
Oh, long before. And since he's become the director, he won't talk to me. So now we communicate via Twitter, where I hurt his feelings. But he reached out to me in November of 2022. So interview with Bongino, end of September. In October, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing in my life. November, I get a phone call from Kash Patel, who I didn't really know. I knew the name, but I didn't know what he did or what he had done or anything about him. And he runs this Fight with Cash Foundation, and he offered me to send a check for $10,000, which was very nice because we had no place to live. We were living with my folks.
Wow.
And, they sent me a check out of the blue. And I thought that was great. And so he was, a friendly, in a world that is not necessarily friendly all the time, because there's a lot of things that were going the other way. A lot of people in the FBI were upset that I was exposing or saying things that they didn't like because it hurt their feelings about working for the FBI. And when I say hurt their feelings, I'm really in this sort of good versus evil thing. And a lot of what the FBI does bureaucratically and administratively, I think, is evil. And I'm unapologetic about that. So when I say hurt feelings, I mean trying to expose and stop evil, because if you are in charge of being the protectors of civil liberties in the United States, and especially if you're self-described as defenders of the Constitution, it'd be nice if you actually did that. And I don't think that happens. Patel reaches out, gives me, sends me a check from his law firm that runs it. The Bunnell Law Group does that. And then in December, I ended up meeting with James O'Keefe again one more time. They actually asked me, would you go on stage with James at America Fest in Phoenix? And I was living 90 minutes outside of Phoenix at the time. So
that's a Charlie Kirk organization, America Fest? Yeah.
So they said, would you come and give a 2-minute speech at America Fest? And I said, I'd rather not. Actually, I'd rather not do that at all. I'm not interested. And the gal who asked me, who's a public figure now, she's gone out and done some investigations. Her name is Arden Young, and she's a total sweetheart, and she was working for Project Veritas. She asked me a couple other times, and I said, Arden, let me be real clear, because I think you've helped me out with getting some stories out that I wanted, and I think I'm helping you. Would it be good for your career and me as your quote unquote source? It's funny for people to think of me as a source to me, because I run my own show, and you're obviously not going to talk me into something I don't want to do. I said, would it be helpful for you professionally if I showed up there? Because I'm not opposed to showing up there, but I'm not going to do it for James or the organization or anything else. But I'll do it for you. We have a personal relationship, and I want to see you succeed. She was probably 25 at the time. And she said, it'd be really great. We'd love to get your kids on stage. We'd love to get your wife and the whole story and, tug on the heartstrings. And I went, absolutely not. None of that's going to happen. My family is off limits. Right. And none of this is ever going to be commercialized. I'm not going to ever put my kids' pictures out there. But my wife might. And so I'll talk to her. So we had this conversation. My wife agreed to stand next to me, and I said we would go down there, and we did it to help Arden. So I did. And I hopefully helped out Arden. Arden was the one who talked me into meeting you. She said, I think it would be good for you to go meet Dr. Bob.
I see.
He's,
maybe
he's
it will
an
be.
important figure for us.
Yeah, we don't know. Maybe it will be. So getting back to Kash Patel, he called you. What was the conversation about?
Well, I met Kash at America Fest. So November, he said, look, I said, I don't need the money as much as anybody. There's got to be people who need $10,000 more than me. I said, I'm not in danger of going without food. Yeah. I got nowhere to live. I don't have a job, but I don't know what, my kids aren't going to go hungry. I'm not broke. I sold my house. I've got some passive income. I'm I thought this out at least well enough to make a position to hold out for another year or two. So somebody must need this money more than me. And he said, well, that may be true, but I don't know who they are. And I got the money, and I want to write you a check, and I know who you are. And Dan Bongino asked me to send you a check, so I'm going to do it if you'll let me. And I said, okay. I said, under one condition, you got to help out my friends. They need it more than I do, I think. And that was the time that Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend were just popping into public. And so those guys all got written a check for a couple $1,000s each as well. So
really?
Great. That's really nice. It gets worse from there, though, just by the way, because they sued me for $5 million. So it's not really that great at the end.
Who did? Who sued you?
Well, the attorneys who run the Kash Patel Fight with Cash Foundation sued me for $5 million about a week and a half ago.
What was the claim?
defamation of somebody that no one's ever heard of.
Of Kash Patel's girlfriend or something.
That's right.
Oh, I heard recently about
So we won't talk a whole lot about it because it's still
Active
early
suit.
on, and I don't know.
Suit.
Maybe they dropped the lawsuit. They haven't served me with it yet, so maybe they wised up and realized it was dumb and they got the headlines they wanted. Defamatory though they were to me. Long and short, the story doesn't end well because Kash and I have this interaction. I meet him at America Fest. He's down at the bar. He seems like a regular guy. He's drinking a Coors Light. He's not fancy. He's hanging out with the security detail for Jason Aldean. So we had this nice conversation for a few minutes, and I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." He goes, "If you come back to Vegas, let me know. I'll take you around." And that ended up happening a couple months later. I go to Vegas for SHOT Show, the firearms industry show, and I met up with him there, and we had dinner, and he was really nice, and I met some of his friends and so on and so forth, and no girlfriend to meet, no girlfriend at America Fest. And so, we have number. I have his number. He has my number. He can text me back and forth. And so we communicated on Signal. And as things started growing, as the campaign started going on, as Donald Trump looked like he might win, then he does win. Then the question is can Kash find a place in the administration? And, I know Kash. I want people that I know in the administration selfishly. So I can tell him we got a problem here. Like, let's fix it. So Kash and I had a lot of interactions while that was going on after November. And it was all sort of situated in how do we get this guy into the FBI directorship? Because he's been asking me about the problem and I'm telling him and he's hearing it and he understands it, I think. And I kind of sua sponte got a bunch of, FBI whistleblowers and some retired guys and some former agents together and some former other employees and analysts. And we concocted like a 20-page briefing. Yeah. Like a PowerPoint action plan. And it was a pitch for how do you reform the FBI without destroying the FBI? If you want to take it back and put it back on the constitutional track, what would you do?
That takes time to do and thought and some courage.
Lots of hours, a lot of conference calls, a lot of people volunteering their efforts, putting it together, making it a clean layout. It's FBI branded and we're adjusting. So in case we had to, if the media ever saw it, so that it's not going to be phraseology that's not going to be palatable. And it was nonpartisan. It's not left or right.
Right.
It was how do you apoliticize an agency that's been weaponized in some sort of political fashion? So we did that. And Kash is calling me on the phone. He's like, "Hey, how do I pitch this? I got 5 minutes with the boss." And that's Donald Trump. He's like, not my boss. I was like, "I don't work for anybody." You got 5 minutes, next week with Donald Trump. What do I say? How do I pitch the reform? And I go, "These are the most important points." He says, "Say it again, but say it faster and cleaner." So I say it again. And then he asks, "What's the pushback against these ideas?" And I go, "Well, the argument is this." And he goes, "How do you counter that argument?" I say, "This."
Well, man, he's a smart guy, I assume, isn't he? Wasn't he a lawyer?
He's not dumb.
Yeah, he's not dummy. He should be able to take what you gave him and run with it. But okay, he's asking you, so that's good. That's all right.
But listen, smart people, if you give them an idea, then they ask you to strongman your own idea, right?
Okay.
Like, how would someone attack your idea? And if you haven't thought of those ideas, you don't know that idea very well.
Right.
And I do.
Okay. Good.
So he did those things, and I was like, "That's a real serious question."
He's serious. Yeah.
Reporters never ask me how to strongman my argument. They just report what I say. People who are trying to fix things ask about what's the pushback.
Yeah, what's the weakness? Right.
Exactly. And how much assessment have you done on that? So we got into those conversations right up until the point, either the day of or the day before his confirmation, he was on the phone with me asking for advice.
Fantastic.
What things should I really hammer home? So you'd think that'd be great.
I would think that after he gets appointed, he'd want you on the team somehow. He'd give you a position on the team because you know where the bodies are buried.
So that came up, and I told him the day before he got confirmed, I said, "I do not want to work for the federal government. The only conditions under which I would accept federal employment, again, is very, very specific. If you told me that you have a job and I'm the only one who can do it and you need me to do it because you can't trust anyone else to, I will begrudgingly do that job. I don't want the job and I'm not asking for it. And I hope that you don't ask me." That was I said, "I have a lawsuit and I'd love it if you settled the lawsuit on favorable terms without me having to fight it all the way to a court. That would be great. And other than that, I got no asks and I'm available for you if you need something." And so he asked me, "Hey, I need some people that I can trust to do some investigations internally." I said, "Absolutely." I said, "Let me give you some names." He said, "Give me 4 people you trust." I said, "I'll give you 6. Here's 6. He said, "Great." He called all 6 of my friends. And he offered all of them positions in headquarters. And immediately, other people started calling and offering them other positions that were not doing what Kash asked them. They were immediately being snatched up or being offered other things to try to subvert them. Now, a couple of my friends ended up going and working for the director. And on a regular basis, we're trying to do reforms. Every single one of them has gone back to doing casework, and every single one of them said that the FBI cannot be reformed in its current status. And Cash stopped talking to me the minute that he was confirmed. The day he was confirmed, February 20th of 2025, was the last conversation we ever had. We congratulated him, me and my friends, said, great job, way to go, Cash confirmed. And he said, that's it. And then he texted back, now we get to work. That's the last I heard from the guy.
And he hired your friends?
He hired my friends that already work for the FBI.
Oh, they already work for the FBI. I see.
But the whistleblowers that I highlighted, guys like Garrett O'Boyle, guys like Steve Friend, they were not made whole until I shamed him into doing it through a podcast, as stupid as that sounds. But I shamed him into doing it. And as far as I understand, the White House chief of staff found out that those guys had not been reinstated and made whole, that they were not given their security clearances back, and told Cash to leave the country. He spent a week in Scotland just last week. He was in Scotland the whole week. I have no idea why. Nothing FBI related as far as we can tell. All my sources say they have no idea what he was there, other than as soon as he left the country, the DOJ was able to sign a deal with 10 whistleblowers that were being represented by Empower Oversight. I'm not one of them. And so my friends got made whole, and I told them, and we've had internal conversations, it's kind of like laying on barbed wire so your buddies can get over the top of it. I took a lot of hits social media-wise because I'm very aggressive and very critical of our current FBI under the two people running it, people who I've spoken to extensively, because I don't think they're doing a good job. And the people who work in the Bureau that speak to me agree with me. And so someone has to be a voice for the voiceless, and I'm this weird outlet. But that also means that you don't get any favors from the administration. So my buddies all got made whole. They all had back pay and reinstatement, and they got their leave reinstated, but not me. Ooh. And the day, Dr. Bob, the day after they announced that settlement was completed, that was on August the 26th. August the 27th, Kash Patel's girlfriend, we'll just put that in air quotes because I think that it was Kash Patel, it's my opinion, sued me for $5 million for defamation as kind of a screw you.
Like last month?
Yeah, this just happened. In fact, your producer was the person who let me know that it happened because I actually didn't know. Jared actually did that. He's the one who let me know that was going on because I had never heard of it because I hadn't been served. I still haven't been served, but he sent me the link. And then, of course, there's, everywhere now there's I talked to an attorney the other day and I'm trying to figure out legal representation, and they said you probably have the single highest profile defamation case in the United States at this exact moment because of what they just did. It's crazy.
It's just all a crazy story arc. You called her or inferred that she was a honeypot for the Mossad or something like that.
Correct. And what's interesting, and not to get too specific, but I've made these clarifications on my own podcast. I did so before because I went back and I went, I crossed my wires. I actually was crossing PragerU and her because her boss at PragerU looks very, very like her. They're both very pretty women with dark hair and similar facial shapes and similar lips and so on and so forth, same eyebrows. And so different color hair, but they look very similar. And then I remembered, I was like, I know I've read that. What am I thinking? There's a bunch of bad information out there that says exactly that she changed her name from one thing to another. It turns out to be false, and I've run that down. But the real wild thing is they make all these allegations in the lawsuit that says, he called her a honeypot, and a honeypot means this and this and this and this, which is something you could say if 2 minutes earlier I hadn't defined my term honeypot. And the term honeypot is colloquial expression. It's not a legal definition, and it's certainly not even something that's codified in Intel. Right. What it means is someone who's attractive that somebody would talk to.
Yeah.
So it's a cyber term as well. When you're doing with, cyber, if you have a very attractive website that doesn't actually do anything, you can have a honeypot in the cyber world as well. So it's just commonly a thing that attracts people in because it looks nice.
And it's not defamatory.
No, I would think it's actually kind of complimentary.
Yeah, it says you're very attractive. Right.
We had a whole story that went on with the FBI. There was a whistleblower account that James Comey employed two quote unquote honeypots that went into the FBI that were working the counterintelligence program that got into the Donald Trump campaign in 2015, 2016. And so the argument is that they were not honeypots because the FBI doesn't do honeypots.
Oh, I see.
Number one, yes, they do. And I'm more than happy to share people. They can go look up Trevor Aronson's work in Denver, Colorado, and the Alphabet Boys, where they put this very large-breasted, attractive female detective from the either the Colorado Springs Police Department or maybe it was Aurora, something like that. But she was a local PD task force officer with cartoonishly large boobs. If you see the picture, it's very funny. And then they went in there and they said her backstory was that she's a recovering sex worker. So she used to be a prostitute.
Great, perfect.
And then she starts luring young men in like 19 and 20 years old to theoretically to talk about BLM and their activism But in reality, she's trying to get them to introduce to her two buddies who are truckers that sell guns illegally because she's trying to set up gun cases for them. And so, the FBI uses honeypots like everybody else.
It's very effective.
Yeah, you just don't call it a honeypot. There's no legal definition. Again, attractive women who men might be predisposed to speaking to is commonly referred to as a honeypot. So that's what I actually defined it. It's like attractive women, men might speak to them. No derogatory thing in there. And so this defamation lawsuit pops in afterwards, all hinging on the term honeypot and an agent of Mossad. And what's wild is there's a lot of people who are agents of Mossad that probably don't know they are, because the word agent doesn't mean you're being paid by the intel service. Usually what it means is you've been recruited and you're a foreign national. You're not Israeli. You're not necessarily Jewish. You're probably someone who's in a country that it has the predominant sort of ethnic look and religion and mindset of that country. That's why you'd be an effective agent.
You'll fit in.
Otherwise, they would just send a spy. They would send an intelligence officer.
Besides, everybody, you just listen to Tucker Carlson. Everybody's an agent of Mossad, right?
That's right. Anybody could be. And sometimes, and this is the fun thing, when you find out and you actually work counterintelligence, which I did, there are oftentimes unwitting agents of all kinds of countries. Almost all of the work done in what's called counterproliferation against Iran, the American companies that are selling technologies that end up getting investigated, they're unwitting agents of Iran. They don't plan to be agents of Iran. They're not trying to be Quds Force suppliers, but there's some third party cutout in another country that's not an intelligence officer, that's been recruited by an intelligence officer. So 1, 2, 3 steps away, you're still an agent of that foreign intel service if you're part of the broader investigation. So you could be an agent of all kinds of things. And here's the other fun thing, because I did this rabbit hole the other day looking at honeypots. There was a woman named Anna Chapman, and she's famously briefed for this story that the FBI calls Operation Ghost Stories. And this was 10 illegal immigrants to the United States that were brought in here legally under false premise through Canada, for the most part. And they were Russian SVR intelligence officers. They were trained by Russia to be spies. And one of them was very, very pretty. And when she was exposed and outed as a Russian agent, she ends up going back to Russia, and then she models for Maxim magazine and does some underwear modeling and does some TV presenting. And, she's real pretty. And so she was referred to as a honeypot, but she never honeypotted anybody. She never did anything that would mean that she would, seduce somebody. But they actually created an entire TV show called The Americans about her character.
I love that show.
Based on a real story, in so much as there are people that were deep cover working for Russia, and theoretically they could have been activated. The funny thing about The Americans versus like the real story, in reality, they never activated these people. The United States actually stumbled upon who they were, realized that they were getting money and, like intermittent, like just hang tight tasking from Russia. And so then they just did a false flag and they exposed them. But Anna Chapman, a quote unquote honeypot for the Russian government as a Russian SVR agent, she was actually charged by the DOJ with conspiracy to act as an unlawful agent of a foreign power.
So not that she acted, but she
never
conspired.
Acted.
She would have.
Allegedly. But what they really did is they just exposed her as a spy.
Yeah, throw her out.
And then they traded her in a prisoner swap. And so she went back to Russia. And so no harm, no foul. And they got to out them. And then they had a big story. And the FBI celebrates a big win. At the end of the day, she was a legitimate Russian honeypot type that never did anything illegal in reality and was never actually convicted of it, because if you came at her with conspiracy to engage in unlawful agency of a foreign power, it's all weak and it's garbage. So it's just a dumb thing to say is defamatory at the end of the day to me.
Getting back to Cash and figuring out with the lawsuit, given how you try to help him and given how he's trying to screw you now, or his girlfriend's trying to screw you, is there any hope for the Justice Department that anybody, I can't imagine anybody better than Kash Patel. I don't know all the people, of course, but he was persecuted and prosecuted by the Justice Department. I remember, right? Because he helped Trump or something. So he was on the pointy end of the spear, getting the spear put to him. You would think that he'd be best at fixing the FBI, but what do you think? He's not.
I think not at all. I think he became a millionaire doing that. And that's interesting that he was able to parlay that sort of Trump experience into a millionaire consultancy and multi-million dollars per year of getting paid. I'm not mad at anybody for making money. We're all in the business of making money in America, but I have expected a lot more. And the person that I expected the least from was Tulsi Gabbard, and she seems the most serious about it. And maybe it's different when the government actually surveils you. and gets into your personal space, which I've experienced. I had government surveillance on me when I got on a plane once. I saw it, I made it, and I avoided it, and then I identified it really clearly, doing what are called SDRs, surveillance detection routes. And I was very clear on who they were. I knew who they were before I got on the plane, and I confirmed them when I got off the plane through action. And when you experience that, it's a little different. I think it does radicalize you a little bit towards liberty and maybe fixing the problem. And so I've seen Tulsi Gabbard spot on over at ODNI. I was her biggest critic because she hated guns, and I'm a big gun guy. You can even see behind me, I've got guns and weapons and whatnot. And I never understood her stance. And after reading her Substack, I was open to being convinced otherwise. And after watching her actions and what she's doing in that position, I feel great that she's actually understands what the job is. Kash Patel, not so much. But I don't think we're without hope, because here's the funny thing. On August the 4th, I dropped a big thread on Twitter. And this is how dumb our administration is, in so much as just the world we live in is dumb now, because people care what's on Twitter. And, you can turn it off at any moment and walk away. It doesn't matter. But it does matter to this administration. It does matter in my life, in so much as I can influence things. And so on August the 4th, I exposed that there were multiple people working inside the FBI that Kash Patel had no idea were working there and didn't know who they were, even though they were in close proximity to him. It was my effort to expose a lack of understanding about the actual problem. And specifically, I gave the administration heads up on this. I called the Friday prior and I said, I'm going to be releasing the following information, and here is all the information that I intend to release. And I'm going to do it publicly. And then on Monday, I did. By the end of that Monday, Kash Patel called a guy named Brian Driscoll into his office, as I understand it. Brian Driscoll was the assistant director of a place called CERG, which runs all the aviation, all the surveillance, and all the tactical for the FBI, including the director's private planes. And he said, I want you to fire this guy that was listed in this thread, whose name is Christopher Meyer. Christopher Meyer was a military veteran. I believe he was in the Air Force, but I'm not 100% sure. He clearly had background as a commercial pilot. So he was a professional pilot. And he also was the case agent that worked with Jack Smith on the special counsel investigation into Donald Trump. And as I understand it, he was the case agent on one of the associated cases that resulted in Mar-a-Lago. So whether he was the classified documents case, he's disputed that, or whether it was one of the other ones working underneath that purview of Jack Smith, he ran a case over there. He was the case agent. And he was flying the FBI director's plane, because right after November, he managed to scoot away to a job where he wouldn't be highlighted as the guy who was targeting now the president of the United States. And that was a smart move on his part. And all I was showing is that Director Kash Patel doesn't even know who's flying his own plane that he's sitting in. And, if you have a private plane, you've also got crew rest. You're not always flying the plane. Sometimes you're in the back because somebody else has to fly because you've maxed out your 12 hours or whatever the times that you can be behind the yoke. So he's in close personal proximity to the FBI director, having been the guy that was running the pointy end of the investigation into Trump. And one of his colleagues was a guy named Walter Gardina. And Gardina was the guy who actually put cuffs on Peter Navarro and ran that investigation, which was also pretty targeted and political as far as people think. So I highlighted they didn't know him, and that they involved themselves in a physical assault and the service of a subpoena on a guy named Harrison Floyd, who started Black Voices for Trump. So these guys who were aggressively working against the Trump campaign during the 4 years of the Biden administration, not only are they still employed, they're in close proximity to the director, or they're in positions of management, or they're senior agents that are working in the Washington field office. And so the ask was, go fire that guy, Chris Myers.
Right.
Chris Meyer, rather. And I gave enough information to prove my case that he was the guy. They obviously determined that I was correct, called his boss's boss in and said, fire that guy. And his boss said no, because that's not what I was trying to do in the first place. I was just proving you don't know who works for your organization. You can't just fire somebody because they did what they were asked to do, especially if it was a legal ask. But you could move them somewhere that's not going to be listening to your conversation in the FBI director's jet.
That's right. That's right.
So they didn't do that. They did the dumbest thing possible. They said, fire this guy. And Brian Driscoll said no, which is actually what you'd expect a good manager to do. And then they fired Brian Driscoll for it. And then they asked for Walter Gardina to be fired. And apparently his boss said no. And then they fired that guy, who's someone I thought should have been fired for a long time, because he ran the domestic terrorism section at headquarters that was responsible for making January 6ers into domestic terrorists in the FBI's eyes.
You've said that America isn't the country you grew up in, that the institutions of our country are broken. So what does the future hold? Are we headed to collapse, civil war? Can it be turned around?
I'm 43, so my my answer to this is going to be limited by the scope of my life and what I can look back on. I will lean on older and wiser people to say what comes next. I have an instinct that it's going to get messy sooner than later. And I think that that the republic that we thought we lived in, we didn't actually ever live in that. If you're on the planet walking right now, the institution of the United States, that the republic that for which it stands, kind of thing that we all said is a Pledge of Allegiance, I think it's been gone since 1908 or 1913.
Wow.
And I think that we've kind of in the fourth iteration of whatever this American experiment is right now. And I think it might be coming to an end too, but that doesn't mean it all ends or that America stops. I just think the next churn has to be something that either means a radical and violent change back to more state-based leadership. I think it's the only way that we really survive and continue the concept of liberty. It might get radically tyrannical. We saw the instinct in 2020 for the government to go and step in 2021. I think the Biden administration continuing would have been very bad for religious liberties and freedom of the press and some other things. So I don't think America as we believed it should have been, and I say we, like people who grew up in the 70s and the 80s and, you know, are my sort of ilk, looked around and thought that we were the good guys and that we did things the right way. I think a lot of that has been unveiled, but I do think that we at least used to act like we were the good guys and aspire to be the good guys. Right. And for whatever reason, people younger than me don't even think America's the good guys, which I think is terrible. So I think something has to change. Something has to give. I think at some point we're going to find ourselves in a struggle, whether it be local, regional, or national. I think that some sort of revolutionary sort of moment has to happen in this country. And I hope that it means we go back to the premise of the Bill of Rights. I hope we look at the 9th and the 10th Amendment, honestly, that not only does the Bill of Rights lay out the things the government is not allowed to do under any circumstances and stays out of our business, but that the states actually have everything that is not listed in the Constitution underneath their purview. That's the way it's supposed to be. You know, I'm a libertarian-minded guy, and I'm also a faith-based guy. So I think that we don't have to live on earth in victory. That's sort of the revolution of Christianity. You don't actually have to win on earth to win. And so that's really hard for a guy that wants to see his kids grow up in a better America than he grew up in, because I don't know that that's coming for my kids, but I'm trying to, you know, balance those two things.
We can pray. Kyle, you've lost your career, your house, and a lot of sleep, but you've gained a platform and a mission. I want to thank you for spending time with me today to share your experiences. And I want to thank you so much more for fighting every day to try to bring America back to the country that we grew up in and that we loved. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You can learn a lot more about Kyle by going to his podcast, The Kyle Seraphin Show. It's streamed live at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, and you can also view the more than 600 episodes that he's recorded. Just go to kyleseraphin.com, all one word, or you can find him on Rumble or YouTube. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, please subscribe, and you'll be automatically notified of future podcasts in this series.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.